There is a particular hour in a great house when the discipline of the day loosens its grip, and has not yet handed the watch to the discipline of the night. The banquet has ended. The musicians have packed their instruments into felt-lined cases. The last of the guests have been bowed toward their carriages. The corridors go quiet in a way they are quiet at no other time, and a man standing his post can hear the building settle its old bones. It was in that hour, on the night the Averny delegation arrived, that a child of 9 came to me barefoot along the West Gallery, her nightgown pale as a moth against the dark paneling, and told me a thing that 4 grown adults had already told her was nonsense. My name is Halvard Renn. For 11 years I stood the Crown's watch at Harrogate, and for the last 4 of them I held the rank of Sergeant of the Household Guard, which is a grander title than the work deserves. The work is mostly stillness. You learn to be furniture with a pulse. You learn that the great secret of guarding anything is not the readiness to strike but the readiness to notice, and that most men fail at the second long before they are ever tested at the first. I have been asked since why I listened to her when no one else would. The honest answer is not flattering to the palace. The honest answer is that I was the only one whose duty had never included the habit of not seeing children. Let me set the night as it was. The Averny delegation had come to negotiate a marriage treaty, not for any of ours but a matter of trade dressed up as courtship, the way such things always are. They were 9 in number, a marquis who spoke for their prince, 2 secretaries, a physician, a chamberlain, and 4 servants who traveled with them and answered only to their own steward. King Alaric had given them the whole of the East Wing, which had stood mostly closed since the old queen died, and the household had spent a frantic week airing rooms that smelled of camphor and cold ash. There had been a banquet that first night, long and glittering and dull, and I had stood at the door of the great hall from the fish course to the suite, and watched 200 people perform politeness at one another. Princess Malin had been at that banquet, seated far down the table between her brother Torin, who was 11 and bored, and an empty chair meant for a countess who never came. She was a serious child. I had noticed her before, over the months, in the way you notice the quiet ones. She did not run in the galleries. She did not beg the guards to let her hold a rifle. She did not do any of the small charming things the little Prince Bram did to melt the household into fondness. She watched. She stood at windows for long stretches. Once I had found her in the armory corridor at dusk copying the shapes of the old regimental badges into a little book with a stub of pencil, and when I asked what she was doing she said, without looking up, that she was learning which ones were real, because 2 of them were painted copies and she wanted to know why. I did not know why. I still do not. But I remembered after that she had been right. 2 of them were copies, hung to fill gaps after the genuine badges went to the museum in the capital. I tell you this so you understand that when she came to me on the West Gallery that night, I already knew something about her that the marquis and the physician and the 2 secretaries did not. This was not a child who imagined things. This was a child who catalogued them. She came up the gallery slowly, the way you move when you are not sure you are allowed to be somewhere. The lamps were turned low. I heard her before I saw her, the small slap of bare feet on cold stone, and my hand had already found the hilt of nothing, because a household guard at his night post carries a ceremonial saber and a great deal of institutional weight and not much else. I turned my head. It was against protocol to turn my head. I turned it anyway. "Sergeant," she said. She knew my rank. She knew all our ranks she had asked months ago and remembered. "Your Highness should be asleep," I said. "It's past midnight." "I know." She stopped a few feet from me and looked up. Her eyes in the low light were very dark and very awake. "I told Nurse Odell. She said I dreamed it. I told Lady Verena at the banquet and she laughed and told me to eat my pudding. I told my uncle's steward, and he said children see monsters in every shadow when there are guests in the house." She recited these dismissals evenly, without self-pity, the way a clerk reads back a list of complaints already filed and lost. "So I'm telling you, because you're the one who's supposed to watch." I have thought a great deal in the years since about that last sentence. You're the one who's supposed to watch." She had reasoned it out with a cold 9-year-old logic that shamed every adult who had waved her away. The nurse's job was to comfort her. The lady's job was to be pleasant. The steward's job was to manage the guests. But the guard's whole and only job was to watch for the thing that should not be there. She had not come to me because I was kind. She had come to me because I was the correct instrument. "Then tell me," I said, "slowly all of it, and I will not laugh." She told me. 3 nights running, she said. She had woken in the small hours because the light was wrong. Her room was in the north corridor of the family wing, and its window looked across a narrow service court toward the blind back wall of the east wing, the wing they had just opened for the Averni. For as long as she could remember, that wall had been dark at night, because nothing lived behind it. But 3 nights running now, there had been a light moving behind the east wing windows on the upper floor. Not a lamp carried by someone going to bed. A small, steady light, held low, that moved from window to window and paused at each one. And at each window, she said, it stopped, and something pale was pressed flat against the glass for a moment, and then the light moved on. "Pale?" I said. "Pale how?" "Like paper," she said, "or a hand with the fingers spread, flat, against the glass." She pressed her own small hand against the air to show me, fingers wide, at every window in order, like he was counting them. I felt the first cold thread of it then, though I could not have told you why. There are things a soldier's body understands before his mind catches up. A man carrying a light from window to window in a wing that should be sleeping, pausing at each, pressing something flat to the glass, moving on in order. My mind reached for the innocent explanation, as a disciplined mind should, and could not quite close its hand around one. "Perhaps a servant," I said, testing it aloud, checking the latches. "They only opened those rooms this week. Some of the windows may not close." He wasn't checking latches. She was very firm. "You check a latch here." She reached out and mimed a hand at the bottom of a window at the catch. He put his hand asterisk here. She lifted her arm and pressed her flat palm high against the imagined glass at the level of her own eyes and above. In the middle, and he had a string. A dark string with something on the end, and he held it against the glass and let it hang and watched it. And then he wrote in a little book. A string with a weight held against the glass allowed to hang straight. I knew what that was. Any mason knew what that was, any builder, any man who had ever had to make a true vertical line where his eye could not be trusted. A plumb line. He was measuring. He was standing inside a dark wing in the dead of night, measuring the windows of the east wing one by one, pressing his hand and a sheet of something flat to each pane, dropping a plumb line and recording what he found in a book. You do not measure windows you intend to look out of. You measure windows you intend to come through. "How many windows?" I asked. She thought. "The upper floor is 7 on the court side. He did all 7 the first night. The second night he only did the last 2, the ones nearest the corner where the drain pipe is. The third night, last night, he did only the very last one, the corner one, for a long time, and then the light went out and I didn't see it again. 7, then 2, then 1. A man narrowing his search, surveying the whole face of the wing, then returning to the 2 most promising approaches, then settling on the third night on a single window, the corner window nearest the old iron drain pipe that ran down into the service court, the one climbable feature on that entire dead wall. He had chosen his door. He had spent 3 nights choosing it, and a child had watched him do it through her own dark window and told 4 adults, and 4 adults had told her she was dreaming. "Which corner?" I asked. "Show me on your fingers where the drain pipe is, court side or garden side." She held up her left hand and folded down the thumb. "Court side, the far end from the chapel, where the old pipe is and the ledge under the windows and the stone thing that sticks out like a shelf." A string course, she meant. A horizontal band of projecting stone that ran along the wing at the level of the upper floor, decorative, a hand's breadth deep. A man could stand on it. A patient man, on a moonless night, could climb the old iron drain pipe to the string course, walk it to the corner window, and be inside a wing full of sleeping strangers before anyone in the family wing had turned over in bed. I looked down at her for a long moment. She looked back, and I understood that she was not frightened, not exactly. She was waiting to see whether I would fail her the way the others had. She had brought her evidence to the last court in the house, and she was watching to see whether it, too, would tell her she had dreamed it. "Your Highness," I said, "thank you for coming to me. You did exactly right." Something in her small shoulders let go. It was a very slight thing. But I saw it, and it has stayed with me, the visible relief of a child who has finally been believed, and how little it takes, and how badly we starve them of it. "You believe me," she said, "not quite a question." "I believe that you saw a light and a hand and a string at every window in order 3 nights running," I said. "That is not a dream. Dreams are not orderly. What I don't yet know is what it means. That's my part. You've done yours. Now I need you to do one more thing, and then you must go back to bed, because if the wrong person learns that you've been watching that wall at night, it becomes dangerous, and I will not have that." Her chin came up. "What's the one more thing?" "Say nothing to anyone else. Not Torin, not Bram, not your nurse. You told the right person now. Let it be finished for you. If you must tell someone, tell me and only me. Can you do that?" "Yes," no hesitation. "Good, then go to bed. And your Highness," she had already half turned. She looked back. "Keep your curtains closed for the next few nights. Not because there's anything to fear from your own window, because a man who counts windows may one day count who is counting him." She nodded gravely, as if I had handed her a commission, and padded away down the gallery into the dark, and I stood at my post with the whole shape of the night rearranged around me, and I did not sleep at all when my relief came, and I was glad of it. By dawn I had made 3 decisions, and all 3 of them were, strictly speaking, above my rank. The first was that I would not report it up the ordinary chain. Not yet. The ordinary chain that morning ran through the household steward, the same steward who had told the princess that children see monsters. It ran through the captain of the guard, a decent enough man named Voss, who was, however, entirely occupied with the ceremonial safety of the delegation, and who would, I was certain, treat a 9-year-old's account of moving lights the way the steward had. And above them it ran, in matters concerning the East Wing and the guests, through the Queen Consort's household, through Morwenna. And I will come to why that mattered, but it is enough to say now that I did not trust the report to survive the climb. A thing like this, handed up too early to the wrong hands, does not get investigated. It gets managed. It gets a plausible explanation attached to it and dropped into a drawer, and the man measuring windows finishes his measuring in peace. The second decision was that I would go and look at the corner window myself, in daylight, and see whether a child's account and a soldier's instinct had anything real beneath them, or whether I was about to make a fool of myself over moonlight and a nervous imagination. The third decision was that if I found what I feared I would find, I would take it not to the steward and not to the captain, but to the one person in that house whose authority no one could manage around, and who had reason of his own to want the truth of it, and that I would take the princess's name out of it entirely, and let her be a child again, and carry the danger myself. That was the whole of my plan at dawn. I want to be honest that it was not much of one. It was a sergeant with a hunch and a barefoot witness, against 9 strangers with a diplomat's immunity, and a house full of adults who had already decided nothing was wrong. I have found that most decisions that change everything look, at the moment you make them, like very small decisions indeed. The service court between the wings is not a place anyone goes. It is a stone well, 3 sides tall, floored with old flags and a drain, meant for the passage of coal and linen and the emptying of ash pails, and it was, that gray morning, exactly as forgotten as I expected. I came into it a little after 7, in my off-duty coat, carrying a ledger of my own so that any watcher would take me for a man about some errand of accounts. I did not look up at the east wing straight away. I have learned that the way to examine a thing you do not want to be seen examining is to examine everything around it first, and let your eye arrive at the thing as if by accident. So I looked at the drain, and the ash store, and the old pump, and the coal hatch. And then I let my eye climb the far wall, the blind back wall of the east wing, and I found the corner window she had named, the last one, court side, at the far end from the chapel, and below it the string course running level across the stone, and beside it the old iron drain pipe, thick as my wrist, bolted to the wall with iron straps gone orange with rust. The pipe was the thing. I want to be precise about the pipe, because it was the pipe that turned my hunch into certainty, and a man who accuses guests of a foreign prince had better be certain. The straps that held it to the wall were old and rusted, and every one of them wore a skin of grime and lichen, and the general filth of a courtyard no one cleans, every one except three. 3 of the straps, spaced up the pipe at the intervals a climbing man's hands and feet would want them, had been cleaned, not polished, not repaired, cleaned in the way a thing is cleaned by a hand or a boot sole gripping it hard again and again, wearing the grime down to bright metal at exactly the points a man would grip. Someone had climbed that pipe, more than once, recently. And where the pipe met the string course, at the level of the corner window, the moss on the stone ledge was crushed and smeared in a long streak, as if a boot had stood there and shifted its weight and turned. I did not touch anything. I stood in the court with my false ledger and let my eyes finish the sentence the princess had begun 3 nights before, and the sentence read, "A man has been climbing to the corner window of the east wing at night to learn how to come through it." The east wing was where the Averni slept. That was the part I could not, at first, make sense of. A man measures the windows he means to enter, but why would a member of the delegation climb by night into the very wing his own people had been given? You do not break into a room you have been handed the key to. Unless the window he was measuring was not the way * in to a guest room at all. Unless it was the way * out of the east wing and in to somewhere else. I went and stood that afternoon in the corner room itself. The physician had been lodged there, a narrow, dry man named Corvith, and he was down at the stables inspecting the delegation's horses, so the room was empty and I had a reason to be checking the latches, which by then I truly did mean to check. And from the corner window I saw what the measuring man had been looking at. The corner window of the east wing did not look out over the garden or the court. It looked across a narrow gap of 6 or 7 feet where the 2 wings very nearly met at the angle of the building, directly at another window, a tall, blind, shuttered window in the return wall of the family wing. And behind that shuttered window, if I had my bearings right, and I did, because I had stood the watch outside its door 100 nights, lay the sealed apartments of the late Queen Isolde. Then I understood the plumb line. Then I understood the counting. He had not been measuring the east wing windows in order to choose one to climb * into *. He had been measuring them in order to find the one that stood at the true height and reached to bridge the gap to the sealed window opposite, the one window in the whole face of the wing from which a patient man on a plank or a ladder laid across that narrow 6-foot gap could reach the shuttered window of a dead queen's rooms without ever setting foot in a guarded corridor. 7 windows surveyed. 2 found promising, 1 chosen, the corner. It was not a way into the east wing. It was a bridge to the family wing, to the one apartment in Harrogate that had stood locked and sealed since Queen Isolde died, and that everyone in the house had spent 3 years pretending not to want. I need to tell you now what was in those rooms, because without it none of the rest makes sense. Queen Isolde had been King Alaric's first wife, and the mother of Crown Prince Rowan and of the children, Malin, Torin, little Bram. She had died when Malin was 6. She had been, by every account I ever heard from those who served her, a careful and a private woman, and in the last long year of her illness she had put her papers in order the way careful people do. And there was a matter, never spoken of aloud but known to the whole household in the way such things are known, of a settlement, a deed, a disposition of certain properties and certain moneys, and the old estate at Wen that had come to Isolde from her own mother's line and was hers to give, not the crown's. It was understood that she had left the whole of it to her 3 children, to come to them at their majorities in trust. And it was understood, equally and equally unspoken, that the present Queen Consort Morwenna, who had married the king 2 years after Isolde died, and who had a son of her own, Lord Cassius, to provide for, considered that settlement an inconvenience, and had more than once, in the careful language of the court, wondered aloud whether the late queen's dispositions had been properly witnessed, and whether they would stand. The rooms had been sealed at the king's own order on the day of the funeral, and the seals had never been broken. Everything Isolde had left, her papers, her jewels, the deed itself and the letters that witnessed it, lay behind that shuttered window, under the king's seal, waiting for the day the children came of age. And a man from a foreign delegation had spent 3 nights measuring the one window in the palace from which those rooms could be reached, without passing a single guarded door. I sat down then on the physician's dry bed in the physician's dry room, and I made myself go slowly, because the thing my mind was building was so large and so ugly that I distrusted it. A foreign delegation does not cross a border to burgle a dead woman's papers. There is no profit in it for a Verney, no treaty clause served by it, no reason under heaven for their marquis to risk a scandal that would sink his own embassy, which meant the man on the drain-pipe was not doing the Verney's work. He was doing someone else's work, and merely wearing the Verney's coat to do it, a servant who answered only to their own steward, a face that could come and go in a wing full of strangers without anyone from Harrogate thinking twice, a man whose presence in the palace had a diplomatic explanation, and whose immunity, if it came to it, would make him almost impossible to hold. Someone had needed a burglar who could not be traced back to them, and the arrival of a 9-man foreign delegation with 4 servants of its own had handed them the perfect disguise. I did not let myself write the name my mind had already written. I am a soldier, not a magistrate, and I had learned long ago that the moment you decide who is guilty, you stop seeing the evidence and start collecting it. I made myself hold the question open, but I noted, because it would have been a failure of my trade not to note it, that the person in all Harrogate with the clearest reason to want Queen Isolde's sealed settlement to quietly disappear before the children reached their majorities was the same person through whose household any early report of moving lights in the East Wing would have had to climb. That evening I checked the calendar of the delegation's stay, which was posted, as such things are, in the guardroom. They were to be at Harrogate 11 nights. On the 7th night, 4 nights hence, there was to be the great mask and fire garden in the lower park, the entertainment the king always laid on for a treaty visit, when the whole household and half the county would be crowded into the gardens after dark, the palace all but empty, every guard and footman turned outward toward the crowd and the fireworks. If I had wanted one night in 11 to cross a plank between 2 windows unobserved, with every eye in Harrogate turned the other way and every guard posted at the garden gates, I would have wanted the night of the mask. I had 4 days. I spent the first of them learning who the man on the drain-pipe was, and I learned it the way a guard learns things, by standing still in the right places and watching who did not want to be watched. There were 4 Verney servants who answered only to their own steward, and I ruled out 3 of them within a morning. 2 were women, and the crushed moss on the string course had held the mark of a boot far too large for either. The 3rd was an old man with a stiff hip who could no more climb a drain-pipe than fly. That left the 4th, a lean, soft-footed fellow of perhaps 40 called Dannock, listed on the household roll as an under-steward and valet, who wore the delegation's gray livery and who had, I noticed once I began to look, a habit of being wherever the family wing and the East Wing came close to touching. I saw him 3 times that first day in places a valet has no cause to be: the head of the north stair, the little gallery above the chapel, the passage that ran behind the sealed apartments. And each time he was doing nothing at all, which is the most suspicious thing a man can be doing in a house not his own. His hands, when I passed near enough to see them at the noon meal, were a servant's hands in every way but one. The pads of his palms and the insides of his fingers were marked with the particular hard shine that comes from gripping iron. I had the same marks on my own hands, from years of the pommel horse and the climbing wall in the guard's yard. I knew a climber's hands when I saw them. So I had my man. What I did not have was proof that would survive a diplomat's denial, or any notion of how to stop him without either accusing the Averny embassy of a crime it had not sanctioned or letting a burglar walk into a dead queen's rooms on the night of the mask. And I still did not have the one thing a soldier most wants before he moves, which is to understand the whole of the thing rather than a corner of it. I understood the how. I did not yet understand the why in its full and particular shape. I had a suspicion of it, dark and unspoken, but a suspicion is not a shape. It was Princess Alara who gave me the shape, and she did it without knowing she had done anything at all. I should say who she was, for she has not yet walked into this account, and she is the hinge on which the whole of it turns. Princess Alara was the king's ward and his late wife's youngest sister, Isolde's sister, which made her aunt to Malin and Torin and Bram, though she was young enough herself, barely 20 that spring, to be more of an elder cousin to them than an aunt. She had come to Harrogate as a girl when her own parents died, been raised in the schoolroom alongside Rowan, and stayed on after Isolde's death as the nearest thing the motherless children had to a mother's blood in the house. She was gentle and a little grave and much loved below stairs, and she wore always on the third finger of her right hand a ring. I had seen that ring 1,000 times without ever truly seeing it, the way you stop seeing a thing a person always wears. It was old and not showy, a band of worn gold set with a single dark red stone, a garnet or a spinel, I never knew which, cut in an old-fashioned square. It had been Isolde's. More than that, it had been the ring the 2 sisters' mother had left, and Isolde had worn it all her married life and given it to Alara on her deathbed in front of witnesses, with words the whole household repeated afterward. This was our mother's, and now it is yours, and when I am gone it will be the one thing of hers that no one can take from the children, because it will be on your hand and not in a box under a seal. A dying woman's small, wise arrangement. One piece of the mother's legacy placed beyond the reach of any dispute over sealed rooms and contested deeds, worn openly on a living hand, its provenance witnessed by 20 people, undeniable. On the second of my 4 days, Alara's ring went missing. I heard of it first as gossip. A maid told a footman told a guard that the young Princess Alara was in a great quiet distress because the ring, the mother's ring, was gone from the dish beside her bed where she set it each night, and no amount of searching had found it. By the time it reached me, it had already been dressed up in the household's favorite explanation for every awkward thing, which was carelessness. She had mislaid it, she had dropped it, it had rolled under a chest, it would turn up. I did not think it would turn up. I had spent 2 days learning to distrust the household's favorite explanations, and a ring that vanishes from a dish at the exact hour that a plot against a dead queen's legacy comes to a head is not a ring that rolled under a chest. I went to find Alara. I found her in the small east sitting room, alone, standing at the window with her right hand closed over her bare third finger as if she could cover the absence, and she was not weeping, which was worse than weeping. She was a young woman who had lost the last warm object of her dead sister's hand and was too well bred to make a scene of it, and the discipline of that was a harder thing to look at than tears would have been. "Your Highness," I said, "forgive me, I heard about the ring. I wondered if I might ask you a few questions, not as gossip, as a matter of the house's security." She turned. Her eyes were dry and rimmed with the effort of keeping them so, Sergeant Renn. She knew me too. The good ones in that house all knew the guards by name, and the bad ones never learned them. There's nothing to secure. I was careless. Everyone says so. Everyone is very quick to say so, I said, about a ring worn by the same hand for 4 years without once being lost. When did you last have it? She had not expected to be believed, any more than the child had. Something in her face steadied, the way a person steadies when they are at last permitted to think a thing they have been forbidding themselves to think. 2 nights ago, she said slowly. I take it off at night and set it in the dish. This dish, she gestured at a small porcelain saucer on the table by the window, and put it on again when I wake. It was there when I went asleep the night before last. It was gone when I woke yesterday. My rooms were not entered. My maid sleeps in the little chamber through that door and heard nothing. There was no one. Who has been in these rooms in the last 3 days? Anyone at all out of the ordinary? A servant you didn't know? Someone come to measure for curtains, to mend a lock, to bring wood? She began to say no one asterisk, and then she stopped, and I watched her remember. A man came to see to the window, she said. The day before it went. One of the guests' people, one of the Averny servants. He had a paper from the Chamberlain's office. He said the sashes in the family wing were being checked because the delegation's rooms had been found to have loose ones, and it was thought the same fault might run through the whole range. He was here perhaps 10 minutes. He worked at the window. He was very quiet and very quick, and I thought nothing of it, because he had the paper. The window. The dish stood on the table by the window, and a lean, soft-footed man with a climber's hands and a forged Chamberlain's paper had stood at that window for 10 minutes, alone but for a young woman who had no reason on earth to watch a valet's hands. What did he look like? I asked, though I already knew. She described Danik. Of course she described Danik. I stood there in the small east sitting room and felt the last piece drop into the place the others had left for it. And the shape of the thing was suddenly whole and clear and far worse than I had feared, because I had feared a burglary, and what I was looking at was a frame. Consider it as I was forced in that moment to consider it. The man on the drainpipe had been measuring, for 3 nights, a bridge from the east wing to the sealed apartments of Queen Isolde. The purpose of reaching those apartments could only be to take, or to alter, or to destroy the deed and the letters that secured Isolde's legacy to her children. But such a burglary, done in the night by a foreign servant, would be discovered the moment the seals were found broken, and a broken seal on a royal apartment is not a thing that can be hidden or explained away. It would bring the king himself, and an inquiry and a hunt for the burglar, and the whole plot would stand exposed even if the papers were gone. Unless the burglary were arranged so that, when the broken seal was found, the evidence pointed not at a foreign servant vanishing back across a border, but at someone inside the house. Someone with a motive everyone already half suspected. Someone whose guilt, once the papers were gone, would be so convenient to a certain party that no one would look further. And what better proof to leave behind, at the scene of a burglary of Isolde's rooms, than a thing that had unquestionably belonged to Isolde and now unquestionably belonged to her sister. A ring witnessed by 20 people as passing from the dead queen's hand to Ilara's, dropped on the floor of the sealed apartments as if it had fallen from the finger of the very person who had broken in to plunder her own sister's legacy. They meant to rob the rooms and blame Ilara. They meant to take the deed and leave the ring. And when the seal was found broken, and the papers gone, and the mother's ring lying on the floor of the dead queen's chamber, the household would tell itself the story it was already primed to tell, that the grave, gentle, much-loved Princess Ilara had, out of some hidden greed or grievance, broken into her sister's sealed rooms to seize the legacy for herself, and had lost her ring in the doing of it, and the true thief would be 100 miles gone in an Averny coach. And the papers that stood between 3 motherless children and a scheming stepmother would be ash. I have stood in a great many charged moments in my years at that post. I do not think any of them turned my stomach the way that small bright sitting room did, with a young woman standing dry-eyed at the window covering the place where her mother's ring had been, not knowing that the ring had not been stolen from her but stolen for her, to be laid at her feet as the evidence of a crime she would be hanged in the world's eyes for committing. "Your Highness," I said, and I chose my next words with great care because everything hung on them. "I am going to ask you to trust me with something and to do exactly as I say and to ask me no questions until I can answer them. Will you do that?" She looked at me for a long moment. "You know something about my ring. I know that it was not lost through any fault of yours. I know that you must not say so to anyone. If a single person in this house, your maid, your friends, the Queen Consort's ladies, anyone hears that the guard thinks the ring was stolen, then the thief learns that we have seen him, and everything I might do to help you becomes impossible. So you must go on letting them believe you were careless. You must let them pity you a little. It will be the hardest thing I ask, because your pride will hate it. But your silence is your safety, and it may be the safety of a great deal more than you. Can you bear it?" Her jaw tightened. She was Isolde's blood, and there was more iron in her than the household ever gave her credit for. For how long? 4 days. Perhaps 3. And at the end of it? "At the end of it," I said, "either I will put your mother's ring back in that dish with my own hand, or I will have failed and you may say what you like of me. But give me the 4 days. She gave them to me. She was, I think, the only person in that house, apart from the child on the gallery, who understood that being believed and being helped were 2 different gifts, and that the second was rarer than the first. I left the east sitting room with the whole architecture of the plot standing clear in my mind, and one enormous problem standing squarely in the middle of it. I could prove none of it. I had a child's account of moving lights, which no adult would credit. I had 3 clean straps on a drain pipe and a smear of crushed moss, which proved a man had climbed but not who or why. I had a young woman's memory of a quiet valet with a forged paper, which the valet would deny and the embassy would defend. And I had a theory, a large, ugly, entirely circumstantial theory, about a plot to rob a dead queen and frame her sister, in which the name my mind kept writing and my discipline kept refusing to write belonged to the second most powerful person in the kingdom. If I took this to the captain, he would tell me I had a hunch and a barefoot witness and to bring him a fact. If I took it to the steward, it would die in his hands, if the steward were even honest, which I was no longer sure of. If I took it, God forbid, anywhere near the Queen Consort's household, I would be handing the plotters a warning and a chance to move their timetable and dispose of me into the bargain. There was exactly one person in Harrogate with the authority to break a royal seal, order a search, and command a foreign delegation's servant held, and with a personal stake in the truth so deep that no amount of household management could turn him aside from it. Isolde's son, the Crown Prince Rowan. He was 23 that spring, and I did not know him well, for a sergeant of the guard does not know a crown prince well. But I had watched him for years the way I watched everyone I guarded, and I had formed the opinion that beneath the polished manner the court required of him, there was a cold, careful, watchful anger that had been waiting, since he was a boy of 19 standing at his mother's grave, for something to be done about the slow disappearance of his mother's memory from the house she had run. He had never accused anyone of anything. He was far too disciplined for that, and far too aware that an heir who quarrels openly with his father's second wife tears the kingdom in 2. But he had watched his mother's portraits come down from the good rooms and go up to the attics. He had watched her name go out of the household's mouth. He had watched Morwenna's son given the apartments that should have been held for Torin, and he had said nothing, and stored it all and waited. I judged that he would want the truth of this more than he wanted anything, and that he had the nerve to act on it, and that he could not be managed. I judged, too, and this weighed with me, that he was the children's brother and Alara's oldest friend, and that if any man in that house would take the risk of it upon himself rather than upon a 20-year-old woman and a 9-year-old girl, it was he. I resolved to bring it to him, all of it, and let a prince decide what a sergeant could not. Getting to speak to a crown prince privately, when you are a sergeant of the guard and the matter cannot be written down or spoken aloud where it might be overheard, is not a simple thing. I did not dare send a note. A note can be intercepted, and a note in my hand asking for a private word with the heir in that week would have been a match near powder. I waited instead, and used the one privilege my post gave me, which was proximity. On the third of my 4 days, Prince Rowan rode out before dawn, as was his habit, to exercise his horse along the river path, and I arranged. It was not difficult. The guard rota is a thing a sergeant controls, to be the man posted at the postern gate through which he returned. He came in a little after 6, on a tall gray horse, alone but for a groom who fell back to take the animal. I stood my post as he passed, and I said, low and level, not turning my head, in the flat voice a guard uses when he is not supposed to be speaking at all. Your Highness, forgive me. There is a matter concerning your mother's sealed rooms and the Princess Alara and one of the foreign servants that I cannot bring through the ordinary channels and dare not write. I need a quarter of an hour of your ear alone where we cannot be heard. It is not a small matter, sir. I would not risk my post for a small one. He did not stop. He did not so much as glance at me. He had, I saw, the same trained discipline I had, the same understanding that the safest way to receive a dangerous word is to appear not to have received it at all. He walked on toward the house, and I thought for a cold moment that I had misjudged him and thrown away everything. And then, without turning, in a voice pitched exactly to reach me and no farther, he said, "The old muniment room below the library. It is never used and it has a good door. I inspect the estate ledgers there on Thursday mornings alone. That is tomorrow. Come at 8 in your off-duty coat, carrying a ledger as if I had sent for you about the guard accounts. Tell no one." A pause, and then, still without turning, in a voice that had gone very quiet and very hard, "You said the Princess Alara. Is she in danger?" "Yes, sir," I said, "though not the danger she thinks." His shoulders changed. It was the smallest thing, the same small thing I had seen in the child's shoulders on the gallery, the difference between a man carrying a suspicion alone and a man who has just learned he is not alone in it. He walked on into the house and gave no other sign, and I stood my post until my relief came. And for the first time since the barefoot princess had found me on the gallery, I was not entirely alone with the thing. The muniment room below the library was a low stone chamber lined with the deed boxes and rentrolls of 3 centuries, smelling of dust and old vellum and candle tallow, with one small barred window at ground level, and, as he had said, a good door, a thick old oak door with an iron lock that a man could turn and trust. I was there before 8. He came at the hour in plain riding clothes, carrying nothing, and he shut the door and turned the great key and stood with his back to it and said, "Now, from the beginning, leave nothing out and add nothing. Who told you and what did they see?" So I told him. I told him about the child on the gallery, though I would not give him her name and he did not press for it. A young member of the household, I said, with sharp eyes and no imagination. And he understood at once whom I meant, and something moved behind his face, but he let me keep her out of it. I told him about the lights and the plumb line and the counting of the windows, 7 then 2 then 1. I told him about the drain pipe and the 3 clean straps and the crushed moss on the string course. I told him what the corner window looked out upon, and he went white when I said it, because he knew that face of the building better than I did, and he saw the bridge in his mind's eye before I had finished describing it. I told him about the mask on the 7th night and the empty palace. And then I told him about the ring, about the forged paper and the 10 quiet minutes at Alara's window and the vanished ring that had not rolled under any chest, and I laid out for him, as steadily as I could, the shape of the frame, the burglary, the broken seal, the papers gone, and Isolde's own ring left lying on the floor of Isolde's own rooms to hang the theft on Isolde's own sister. He was silent for a long time when I had finished. He had not moved from the door. He looked at the deed boxes on the shelves, and I understood that behind that still face, he was doing what I had done in the physician's room, going slowly, distrusting the size and ugliness of the thing, forcing himself to look for the innocent reading and failing to find one. "You have not said her name," he said at last. "No, sir, and I will not. I have no proof that will bear the weight of a name, and a man who names the great before he can prove them is a man who ends his own days quietly and helps no one. But you know whose reasons these are. It was not a question." "I know," I said carefully. "Who in this house has spoken of doubting whether your mother's settlement would stand? I know through whose household any report of lights in the east wing would have had to travel to reach the king. I know who profits if the deed to wend and the monies for your brothers and sister turn to ash before you and Prince Rowan come of age. I know all of that, sir, knowing it is not proving it. And if we move against a name and are wrong in the smallest particular, we destroy ourselves, and we destroy the Princess Alara along with us, because the very act of accusing the Queen Consort of framing her would look, to the world, like the desperate lie of a guilty woman's friends." "Yes," he said it flatly, and I saw that he had understood the trap in its whole depth, which was the true genius of the thing, that the plot was built so that any attempt to expose it would look like the crime it exposed. If they accused Morwenna and failed, they proved Alara's guilt. If they said nothing, the theft would go forward and Alara would hang for it anyway. Whoever had designed this had understood something cold about how palaces think, and had built a machine that turned every possible defense into fresh evidence for the prosecution. "Then we do not accuse," Rowan said, and now he came away from the door and I saw that his stillness had been the stillness of a man loading a decision, not the stillness of a man frozen by one. "We do not accuse anyone of anything. We do the one thing the design cannot survive. We find the ring before it can be planted." I confess I had not seen it so clearly until he said it, and I have never stopped admiring the plainness of it. The whole engine of the frame depended on a single object being in a single place at a single time, Alara's ring, on the floor of the sealed rooms, on the morning after the mask. Everything else was theater around that one fact. If the ring was found before the mask, somewhere it had no business being in the possession of someone who had no honest reason to hold it, then the frame did not merely fail, it reversed. A ring stolen from Alara's dish and hidden away to be planted was, if we could lay our hands on it in the hiding place, the single hardest, most physical, most undeniable piece of proof imaginable. It said, in a language no diplomat could argue with, this was taken from her in order to be used against her, and here it is in the hands of the person using it. "The ring is the whole of it," Rowan said. "The rest, the lights, the pipe, the valet, that is the delivery. The ring is the payload, and the ring is not in the east wing." He looked at me. "A foreign servant does not keep such a thing on his person. If he is searched, if he is even suspected, an object that ties him to the family wing hangs him and his masters both." He handed it over the moment he had it. He gave it to the person whose plan it serves, to be kept safe until the night it is needed, somewhere no one would ever think to look and no one has any right to search. "The Queen Consort's apartments," I said. It was the first time either of us had come so near the name. "Her rooms are the one place in Harrogate no seal covers and no guard may enter and no steward may search," Rowan said. "Not the king's, not mine. By her rank and by simple decency, a lady's private apartments are inviolate, which makes them the perfect strong room for a thing that must not be found. She could keep the crown jewels in her jewel case in plain sight and no one would ever open it, because to open it would be an unforgivable insult to the second lady of the realm." He said it without heat, laying it out as I had laid out the drain pipe, and then he said the thing that made my blood go still. "So that is where we will look." "Sir," I chose the word with care, "if you are wrong, if the ring is not there, you will have committed the one offense a crown prince cannot walk back. You will have broken into your stepmother's rooms and searched her belongings like a thief, and there will be no proof to justify it, and she will have you where she has wanted you for 3 years, as the jealous heir who could not bear his father's second marriage, who invents plots and violates a lady's privacy out of spite. You will have handed her the very story she needs, and you will not be able to protect the Princess Alara or your brothers, because you will have destroyed your own standing to protect anyone. I know it, he said. I have known it since you said the word ring asterisk. He was quiet a moment. You are telling me the risk because it is your duty to tell me, and I am grateful for it. Now I will tell you why I will take it anyway, and then we will speak no more of the risk, because a man who keeps counting the cost of a thing after he has decided to do it merely talks himself out of it slowly. He put his hand flat on one of the old deed boxes, and I understood that under his mother's name it very likely held some of his mother's papers, and that he had spent his boyhood in this room. My mother arranged everything so that her children would be provided for and could not be robbed. Everything. And she made one arrangement she thought was cleverer than all the rest. She put the safest piece of it on the hand of the one person she trusted above all the others, so that it could never be locked in a box and disputed. And the plot against us has taken that very arrangement, that gift of love, and turned it into the knife. They mean to use my mother's dying kindness to Alara to destroy Alara. I will not permit it. I would rather be the jealous heir who searched a lady's rooms and found nothing than the prince who stood on his dignity while his mother's last kindness was made into a hangman's rope. Now, how would you do it? You are the soldier. I had been thinking about exactly that since the word had first come into the room, and I laid it out for him plainly, because a plan spoken plainly is a plan whose weaknesses show themselves before they can kill you. The problem was threefold. First, we could not search her rooms while she was in them, nor while her ladies were, and she was rarely without one or the other. The Queen Consort kept a full and watchful household. Second, if we searched at the wrong hour and were discovered, we were finished, whatever we found or failed to find. Third, and this was the sharpest of the three, we could not afford to find nothing, because a search that came up empty was not merely a failure but a catastrophe, and yet we could not know the ring was there until we looked. We would be staking everything on a single throw with the dice hidden. There is 1 hour, I said, when her apartments will be certainly and wholly empty, and when every eye in Harrogate will be turned the other way, and when a search, if it is discovered, can be explained as almost anything, because the whole house will be in confusion and movement. The same hour the plotters chose for the same reason. He saw it at once, the mask. The mask, I said. On the 7th night the whole household goes down to the fire garden. The Queen Consort must be there. She cannot absent herself from the king's own entertainment for a foreign prince's treaty. Her absence would be remarked by 200 people. Her ladies attend her. The rooms stand empty for 3 hours. And here is the turn of it, sir, that I did not see until you said the ring was the payload. The very night they have chosen to plan it is the last night it will still be in the hiding place. They will not move it until the last moment, an object like that is safest kept still and moved once at the end, straight to the sealed rooms. So on the night of the mask, before the burglary, the ring is in her apartments, and her apartments are empty, and the whole house is looking at fireworks. There is our hour. It is their hour turned against them. And if we are wrong about where it is kept, if it is in some strongbox we cannot open, or in the valet's coat after all, or... Then we have 3 hours and we search as a soldier searches a billet, I said, which is not the way a frightened man ransacks a room, throwing things and learning nothing. A search has an order to it. You begin with where a clever person would hide a small object they must be able to retrieve quickly and unobserved, and you work outward. A woman who must keep a ring safe for 4 days, and then take it up in an instant on a busy night, does not bury it under a flagstone or sew it into a mattress. She must be able to reach it in the dark, in a hurry, without disarranging her rooms. She keeps it near and hidden in plain sight, and among her own things where no honest hand would ever pry, in her jewel case among 50 other rings, or in a scent bottle, or slit into the lining of a glove, or in the false bottom of a work-box. I know the hiding places, sir. It was part of my training to know where things are hidden so that I might find them. He looked at me for a moment with something new in his face. Where did a household sergeant learn to search a billet like a soldier searches for contraband? I was not always a household sergeant, sir, I said, and left it there, and he was too well-bred and too pressed for time to ask the rest, though I saw him file it away. It is not part of this account, my earlier service, except to say that there had been a war on the eastern marches when I was a young man, and that finding things men did not wish found had been, for a hard few years, the whole of my trade, and that I had thought all of that safely behind me until a barefoot child on a gallery made it suddenly, terribly useful again. We settled it there, in the muniment room, in a quarter of an hour, and it was as simple and as insane a plan as any I have been part of. On the night of the mask, when the household had gone down to the garden, Prince Rowan and I, he insisting, against every argument I made, that he would not send a servant to do a thing that might end in disgrace and would face it himself, would enter the Queen Consort's apartments and search them in 3 hours for a single dark red ring. If we found it, we would have it, and everything changed. If we did not, we would put every disarranged thing back precisely as it had lain, and withdraw, and I would take the whole guilt of the intrusion upon myself if it were ever known, and the prince would deny all knowledge of me, and we would try, somehow, with the little we had, to stop the burglary from the other end. That was the plan. A prince and a sergeant against a diplomat's servant and the second lady of the realm, with a child's word and a smear of moss for our warrant, and 3 hours by firelight to find a thing the size of a walnut in the private rooms of a woman who had built her whole scheme on the certainty that those rooms would never be searched. There was one part of it I did not tell him that morning because I had not yet decided how to manage it, and it troubled me the whole of the day between. It was this: getting into the Queen Consort's apartments unseen was not, in fact, a thing a prince and a sergeant could simply do. Her rooms had a door, and the door had a lock, and beyond the door in the little antechamber there sat, at all hours, a single sentry of the household guard, one of my own men, whose whole duty was to see that no one entered without leave. On the night of the mask he would still be there. A lady's rooms are not left unguarded merely because their mistress is at a party. To reach the ring, we would have to get past one of my own guardsmen without his knowing who had passed, or make him complicit, or draw him off. And every one of those options had a way of going wrong that ended with my own man testifying, honestly and ruinously, that he had seen the crown prince break into the Queen Consort's rooms. I spent that whole day turning it over, and in the end the answer came to me from the plot itself, and it was this: the plotters, too, had a guard to get past. The sentry at the Queen Consort's door was a problem for them exactly as he was a problem for us, unless he was theirs. Unless the man posted at that door on the night of the mask was a man the Queen Consort's household had asked for by name, a man who could be trusted to see nothing. And if that were so, if I could learn who was to stand that post on the 7th night, and found that it was a man out of the ordinary rotation, a man the plotters had arranged, then I would have, at last, one hard fact that pointed a finger and one more thread to pull. So I went, that afternoon, to the guardroom, and I looked at the duty rota for the night of the mask, and what I found there rearranged the whole plan a second time, and taught me that I had been, for all my care, still underestimating the people I was up against. The sentry posted to the Queen Consort's door for the 3 hours of the mask was to be a young guardsman named Perrin, a good lad, honest, not 2 years in the service, entirely unremarkable. That was the first surprise, not one of the Queen Consort's known men, but a nobody. And then I saw the second thing, the thing that stopped me cold, and I understood that the plotters were cleverer even than I had feared. Perrin had been posted to that door not by the ordinary rota but by a written order, and the written order had been countersigned, as such special postings were required to be, by the captain of the guard, Voss. And beside Voss's signature in the margin in a clerk's neat hand, was the note explaining the special posting. At the request of Her Majesty the Queen Consort, that a steady man be on her door during the entertainment, the household being much reduced. I stood over that rota a long time. On its face it was the most natural thing in the world, a lady asking that her door be steadily kept on a busy night. That was the beauty of it. An honest young sentry, requested by name, posted by proper written order, countersigned by the captain, standing an entirely lawful watch. And what that honest young sentry was truly there to do, without ever knowing it, was to be the incorruptible witness who would swear, afterward, that the Queen Consort's door had been kept the whole night, and no one had gone in or out, so that, when the sealed rooms were found robbed the next morning, no suspicion could ever fall upon her apartments, because a guardsman of unimpeachable honesty had watched her door for 3 hours and seen nothing. They did not need a corrupt sentry. A corrupt sentry can be broken. They needed an honest one because an honest one's word was worth more. Perrin was not a lock they had bribed. He was an alibi they had built. And he was, therefore, the exact obstacle standing between us and the ring. To search the Queen Consort's rooms we had to get past a man whose whole value to the enemy was that he would honestly report everyone who passed him. We could not bribe him. He would refuse and report the offer. We could not slip by him. The antechamber was small and lamplit, and we dared not tell him the truth, because the truth was a wild accusation against the second lady of the realm, and if we were wrong, or if he did not believe us, he would do his honest duty and raise the house. I brought this to the prince that evening. We had arranged a second meeting, the same way, the muniment room after dark, and it was here that Rowan showed me the quality that made me follow him without reserve for the rest of that night, and as it happened, for the rest of my service. A lesser man would have looked for a way around Perrin. Rowan looked straight at him. "We do not go around the honest man," he said. "We go through him and we make him honest for us instead of against us. There is one order in this house that supersedes the Queen Consort's request, and one man whose word a guardsman cannot question, and that is the crown. I will not sneak past my own sentry like a burglar in my own house. I will relieve him." He saw my face and went on, hard and clear. "Listen. On the night of the mask, I will come to that door in person as the crown prince, and I will give guardsman Perrin a lawful order, that I am taking the watch on this door myself for the space of an hour, on the crown's business, and that he is dismissed to the guardroom and is to say nothing of it to anyone until I release him. He is a guardsman. That is a lawful order from the heir. He will obey it, and he will be able to swear with perfect honesty that the crown prince himself relieved him, which is not a burglary, Renn. It is the crown taking a post. If it comes to an inquiry, I did not sneak into her rooms. I stood a watch on my own family's wing, and I looked into a matter of the realm's security. Let her explain, before the king, why the heir may not enter a room in his own father's house. Let her explain what was in it that she so needed unsearched. I saw the whole shape of it then, and its boldness took my breath. He was not going to hide the search. He was going to make the search itself an act of crown authority, done openly by the heir in the sight of an honest witness, so that if the ring was there, it was found by the crown prince exercising a right no one could deny. And if it was not, he had merely, as he said, stood a watch. He was turning their own weapon end for end. They had built an honest witness to prove the door was never entered, and Rowan would use that same honest witness to prove that when the door was entered, it was entered lawfully, by the one man in the realm entitled to enter anywhere. Perrin, built to be Morwenna's alibi, would become the crown's. "There is a flaw in it, sir," I said, because it was my duty to find the flaws. "If you relieve the sentry openly and are seen, word may reach the Queen Consort in the garden before we are done. She has ladies who come and go. If she learns the heir has taken her door, she will guess why, and she may find some way to send word to the valet to abandon the burglary. In which case the ring is never planted, which saves the princess, but we never catch them, and the whole thing sinks back into the dark to be tried again next year, with us forewarned against. And worse, she may simply come up herself, with the king on her arm, and demand to know why the crown prince has shut himself in her apartments, and if we have not yet found the ring, we are undone in front of the king. Then we must be quick, and we must be right about where it is, Rowan said, and we must have an answer ready if the worst comes. I will think on the answer, you think on the where. And Renn, he stopped me at the door, you have given me this week the thing I have wanted for 3 years, which is not the ring and is not the proof. It is the certainty that I was not mad to feel my mother's house being quietly taken from her children, one small theft at a time. Whatever comes of the mask, I will not forget who brought it to me. Nor, I think, will she so watch yourself from tonight. A man who is about to lose a great scheme grows dangerous first to the small people nearest the truth of it. Keep to open places. Trust no orders that come to you in writing, however good the signature. And carry that saber sharp. I went back to my quarters that night by the lit corridors and not the dark ones, and I found that I had, without deciding to, begun to do exactly as he said. The 3 days between narrowed to 2 and the 2 to 1, and the 1 to the afternoon of the mask, and I will not pretend the waiting was anything but the hardest part. A soldier can bear the moment of action. It is the hours before, when the plan is made and cannot be improved and there is nothing left to do but let the time run out toward it, that grind a man down. I filled them as best I could. I confirmed, by quiet watching, that the valet Danik was still in the house and still haunting the places where the wings drew near. He was. On the afternoon of the mask I saw him at the head of the north stair, doing nothing, with the particular stillness of a man saving himself for the night. I confirmed that the ladder plank he would need had been readied. In the disused lumber room off the service court I found, tucked behind the coal, a fresh-cut board of good deal, the right length to bridge 6 feet of gap and bear a man's weight, with clean rope whipped to each end for the lashing, and I left it exactly where it lay, because a trap you have found is worth more sprung than sprung early. And I went once to the small east sitting room, and I told the Princess Alara only this, that she was to attend the mask, be seen by everyone, stay in the light and the crowd the whole evening, and on no account return to her rooms alone before midnight. She looked at me and did not ask why, and I loved her a little, in the way a soldier loves anyone who can be brave without needing to be told the reason. Then the sun went down, and the lamps went up along the garden walks, and the household went down through the great doors in its silks, and its masks toward the fire garden, and Harrogate emptied itself of everyone who mattered and left the upper wings to the dark, and the 2 of us. The mask was magnificent. I could hear it from the family wing, the farm music, the roar and crackle of the fire garden, the great collective gasps as each set piece of the fireworks bloomed and fell. From the north windows I could see the whole lower park lit orange and gold, 200 masked figures small as toys along the walks, and among them, somewhere, a woman in a mask who believed that at that very moment a foreign servant was climbing an iron pipe toward her dead rival's rooms, and that by morning her 3 stepchildren would be beggared and her husband's first wife's sister disgraced, and that she had built it all so cunningly that no power on earth could trace it to her hand. I stood at the window and watched the fire fall on the water, and I thought, you have forgotten the guard. You have thought of the king, and the captain, and the steward, and the honest sentry, and the immunity of your foreign burglar, and you have accounted for every powerful man in the house. You have not thought once about the sergeant at the door, because the sergeant at the door is furniture with a pulse. That was your one mistake, madam, and it will be enough. Prince Rowan came to me in the dark of the family gallery a little after 9, in plain clothes with a dark cloak over them, and we went together to the antechamber of the Queen Consort's apartments, where young Perrin stood his lawful, unwitting watch. The boy came to attention so hard I heard his heels. Your Highness. Guardsman Perrin. Rowan's voice was easy, unhurried, absolutely certain, the voice of a man who has every right to be exactly where he is. I am taking this post for a time on the Crown's business. You are relieved. Go down to the guardroom and wait there and say nothing of this to anyone, not the captain, not your fellows, no one until I send for you and release you. Do you understand your order? Perrin's eyes went for one flicker to me, the sergeant, standing at the prince's shoulder, giving him the smallest nod, and then back to the prince. And he did the thing an honest young soldier does when the heir to the throne gives him a lawful order in a level voice. He obeyed it. Yes, Your Highness. He saluted and turned and marched away toward the guardroom, and he would be able to swear on his life ever after that the Crown Prince himself had relieved him at that door in person and dismissed him, which was the exact and honest truth, and which was worth to us more than any lie. The door was locked. Of course it was locked. Rowan had thought of that too. He had, over the years as the heir, been given a ring of the household's master keys for reasons of his own security, and it hung heavy in his hand now. But before he could try them, I stopped him, because a search is a discipline, and the first discipline is not to leave your own marks. I drew from my coat 2 pairs of clean white gloves, my own ceremonial gloves, and gave him 1 pair and put on the other. Touch nothing with a bare hand, sir, and we count everything. Every drawer we open, we note how it lay, and we leave it lying the same. If we find nothing, she must never know we were here, and if we find it, everything we touch after that must be able to bear the eyes of the king. He looked at me over the white gloves with something like grim admiration, and then he found the key, and the lock turned, and we went in. I had never been inside the Queen Consort's apartments. Few had. They were 3 rooms, an outer sitting room, an inner boudoir, a bedchamber beyond hung in the deep blue and gold she favored, warm even in the dark, smelling of her scent and of beeswax and of cold hearth. The firelight from the garden came faintly through the tall windows and threw the whole suite into a shifting orange dusk. Somewhere below, the fireworks cracked and the crowd cried out. We had, I judged, 2 hours if we were lucky, and rather less if we were not. We work from her nearest reach outward, I said low. A thing she must take up in an instant on a busy night without disarranging her rooms. She keeps it close to where she dresses, hidden among her own most private things where no honest hand would ever go. Her jewel case first, her dressing table, her work box. Her gloves, her scent bottles, then outward. You take the sitting room and the work table by the window. I will take the dressing table and the jewels, note everything, go. I have searched a great many rooms in my life, in the war and after, and I can tell you that the hardest thing to search well is a room belonging to a person of taste and secrecy, because such a person hides things not in holes but in plain sight, among like things, where the eye slides over them. I did not tip out the jewel case in a heap. I lifted each tray in turn and laid its contents in order on a cloth and looked at every piece, and there were rings enough in it to ransom a town, diamonds, sapphires, a great emerald, ropes of pearl, and not one of them was a worn old band of gold with a single square-cut dark red stone. I searched the false bottom under the trays, which every good jewel case has, and found letters there, which I did not read, because they were not mine to read and were not what I sought. I searched the dressing table drawer by drawer. I searched the scent bottles, uncorking each and tilting it to the firelight. I searched her gloves, running 2 fingers down the length of every finger of every pair, feeling for the small hard lump that would be a ring sewn into a lining, and found nothing but glove. Behind me at the work table, I heard Rowan going through the same careful discipline, and once he said very low, "Nothing here," and once, "Renn, a locked drawer," and I came and looked, and it was a small drawer in her writing desk, locked, and I picked it in under a minute with a bent probe from my own coat, that, too, had once been my trade, and it held money and a seal and a bundle of household accounts and no ring, and I locked it again exactly as it had been. The clock on her mantel struck 10. We had been an hour. We had searched the outer rooms and the dressing table and the desk and the jewels, all the near and obvious places, and we had found nothing, and I felt the first cold finger of the thought I had been holding off since the muniment room. What if I am wrong? What if the ring is in the valet's coat after all, or already gone across to the sealed rooms, or in some place we will never think to look, and we are two men who have broken into the second lady's apartments to find precisely nothing? Rowan felt it too. I saw it in the set of his shoulders as he straightened from the desk. But he did not say it, and neither did I, because a search is not over until it is over, and I had one principle left to apply that I had not yet applied. "Sir," I said, "we have searched where a careful woman would hide a thing she wished to keep. We have not yet searched where a careful woman would hide a thing she wished to be able to deny *." He turned. "There is a difference. A jewel she keeps among her jewels. But this ring is not a jewel to her, it is a live coal. If it were ever found in her jewel case, she is finished. There is no innocent reason for the second lady to hold her stepniece's stolen ring among her own rings, so she will not have hidden it among her things at all. She will have hidden it among things that are not hers, things she can disown, in a place she can reach but need never account for. Where in these rooms is there something that is not her own?" We looked at each other in the orange dark, and Rowan said slowly, "The children's things." For there was in the Queen Consort's sitting room a small painted cabinet that I had noted and passed over, a pretty thing of the kind kept for when the younger children were brought to their stepmother's rooms, holding a few toys, a battledore, a box of spillikins, a rag doll, the small clutter a lady keeps to occupy a child for an hour. It was not hers. It was full of things she could disown in an instant. Why, those are the children's toys. Anyone might have put anything among them. And it stood not 3 steps from her own chair, within her easy reach, and no searcher on earth would think to look for a stolen ring in a box of a child's spillikins. I crossed to it and knelt and went through it with my gloved hands, slowly, and it was in the third thing I lifted. There was a small wooden box of the sort that holds a set of ivory spillikins, and I slid its lid and tipped the thin ivory sticks into my palm, and among them, dull and small and unmistakable, a worn band of old gold set with a single square-cut stone that caught the far firelight and threw back one point of deep, dark red, lay Princess Alara's ring. I did not touch it. I knelt there with the spillikins in one palm and the box in the other hand and the ring lying in the box among the last few ivory sticks, and I said, very quietly, "Sir, bring the light." Rowan came and knelt beside me and looked into the box, and for a long moment he did not speak at all. I have thought since that he was saying goodbye in that moment to some last small hope that he had been wrong, that the man his father had married a good woman, that the thing eating his mother's house was only carelessness and time and not a will. The ring took that from him. It lay in the box and it said, past all argument, past all diplomacy, past all a clever tongue could ever spin. Your stepmother took a dying woman's gift off a sleeping girl's table and hid it here to be planted in a robbed grave. And here it is, in her own room, in her own reach, among the things she meant to disown. "That is my mother's ring," he said at last, and his voice was not loud, but there was something in it I had not heard before and did not expect ever to hear again from any man. "That is my mother's ring, that she put on Alara's hand with her dying breath so that it could never be taken. And it is in my stepmother's rooms." He looked up at me, and the firelight was on his face, and it was the face of a man who has finally, after 3 years of doubting his own eyes, been shown that his eyes were right all along. "You found it." "We found it, sir," I said. "And now we must be very careful and very quick and very cold, because finding it is not the end. It is the middle. The ring in this box damns her only if it is seen here by the right eyes before it can be explained away or moved or made to vanish. If we take it and go, it is our word against hers that it was ever here at all, and hers is the higher word. We must not take it. We must bring the king to it." Rowan understood at once, and the understanding cost him, for it meant that his father, in the middle of a treaty feast before a foreign delegation, must be brought quietly up from the garden and shown in his wife's own rooms, a thing that would end his marriage and shame his house. But there was no other way that was proof against a clever tongue, and the prince did not flinch from it. "I will bring him," he said. "You will stay here at this box, and let nothing and no one touch it until the king himself has seen it lie exactly as we found it. Not the Queen Consort, not her ladies, not the captain, no one. You guard this box now as you have guarded any door in your life." "Can you do that?" "It is the one thing in the world, sir, that I know how to do," I said, and it was the truest thing I said that night. He went. I heard the door lock behind him and his quick step fade toward the garden, and I knelt in the orange dark by the little painted cabinet, with the box open and the ring lying in it among the spillikins exactly as I had found it, and I did the work I had been trained for and shaped for and had thought I had left behind. I stood a watch over a small object that a great deal of power very much wished unseen, and I did not move. It was the longest hour of my life, and it very nearly went wrong at the end of it, and this is how. I had been perhaps 3/4 of an hour at my post over the box when I heard, from the inner bedchamber, a small sound that had no business being there, the faint knock and scrape of wood on stone at the window, and then the low grind of a shutter easing back. I went cold and still. The plotter's timetable and mine had crossed. While the prince was gone for the king, the valet Danik had climbed his iron pipe and walked his string course and laid his plank across the 6-foot gap, and he had come, not, as I had assumed all week, into the sealed rooms from the east wing side, but the other way first, into the Queen Consort's own bedchamber through her window, to take up the ring for planting from the very hiding place I now guarded, before crossing back to do the deed. Of course. He had to fetch the payload before he could plant it, and the payload was here, and here I was. I moved to the doorway of the inner room without a sound, and I saw him. A lean gray shape astride the sill, one leg in and one leg out over the dark drop, a small shuttered lantern hooded at his belt, reaching one gloved hand toward the little cabinet in the sitting room as if he could already see the box in it. He had done this so many times in his mind that he came in half certain of the dark, and that half certainty was his undoing, because he did not expect a man to be standing 3 feet inside the window, and when he came down off the sill onto the floor of the bedchamber, I took him. I will not dress it up. I had been, in a harder life, a man whose work was the quiet taking of other men in the dark, and though 20 years had passed, the body does not forget such things any more than it forgets to swim. He was quick, and he was strong, and he had a short blade at his belt that he got a hand to, and for a few seconds it was a real and ugly business in the black of that room, 2 men and no words and the fire cracking far below. But he was a burglar and I was a soldier, and there is a difference, and it told. I put him face down on the Queen Consort's own carpet with his blade spun away under the bed, and his arm locked up behind him and my knee in his back, and I held him there, breathing hard, and I said the only thing I said to him the whole night. Lie still. You are the least of what's wrong in this house, and you have just walked into the middle of it. Lie still, and it may go easier on you than on those who sent you. And it was into that, a foreign servant face down on her carpet, a sergeant of the guard kneeling on him, a plank laid bare across the gap to a dead queen's window, and a small painted cabinet standing open with a stolen ring in it, that Crown Prince Rowan came back through the door of the Queen Consort's apartments, and at his shoulder, still in the gold and the orders of the feast, with his mask pushed up on his brow and his face like a gathering storm, came King Alaric himself. Behind the king came others, drawn up from the garden by the sight of the air, bringing his father away white-faced in the middle of the mask, the captain of the guard, Voss, and 2 more of my own men, and Princess Adela, the king's sister, sharp-eyed and silent. And behind them, drawn by the current the way such people always are, came the Queen Consort Morwenna, her mask in her hand, a question already shaping on her lips that I watched die there as she took in the room. I have been asked since to describe the king's face in that moment, and I have never been able to do it justice. He looked first at the man on the carpet, and then at the plank at the window and the black gap beyond it and the shuttered lantern, and then, because his son led his eye there, saying nothing, only pointing one white-gloved hand at the little painted cabinet and the open box and the ring. And he crossed the room and he knelt, a king in his feast clothes kneeling on his wife's floor, and he looked into the box without touching it, and he knew the ring. Every soul in that house knew that ring. He had watched his first wife wear it for 20 years and give it, dying, to her sister. "Whose room is this?" the king said. He said it very quietly, and he did not look up. No one answered. He knew whose room it was. "Whose room is this?" he said again, and now he did look up, and he looked at his wife. I will not set down here all that was said in that room in the hour that followed, for much of it belonged to the king, and is not mine to give away, and some of it was the sound of a man learning a thing that broke something in him that never entirely healed. Morwenna was clever to the last. She reached at once for the story she had built, that it was a plot against her asterisk, that the ring had been planted in her asterisk rooms to disgrace her, that the heir who had never accepted her had done this. And for the space of a breath I saw it might even work, because it was the very mirror of the truth, and a frightened court will believe the loudest voice. But she had made, as I said at the first, one mistake, and it was standing in the room. She had not accounted for the guard. And when the king turned, in his doubt, to the one witness in the room who had no stake and no name and no ambition, to the sergeant kneeling on the burglar, I gave him the whole of it, plain and cold and in order, as I have given it to you. The counting of the windows and the plumb line and the clean straps on the pipe, the forged paper and the 10 quiet minutes at the Princess Alara's window, and the ring that did not roll under any chest. The reasoning that a thing kept to be disowned would be hidden among things that could be disowned. And at the last, the man on the carpet, taken not in the east wing but climbing in through the Queen Consort's own window to fetch the ring for planting, which no plot against her could ever explain. For why would her enemies send a burglar to remove the evidence they had planted against her? The burglar's road ran one way only, and it ran from her window outward to the sealed rooms, and it damned her past any mirror tale she could spin. The king listened to all of it without a word, and when I had done, he was silent a long while, and then he did a thing I have never forgotten. He reached into the box with his own hand, and he took up the ring, and he stood, and he crossed to where his sister Adela stood, and he put it into her keeping and said, in a voice gone rough, "See that this is on Alara's hand before she sleeps tonight. Tell her the guard kept his word." And I understood that Rowan had told his father, on the walk up from the garden, whose ring it was and what had been meant for its owner, and that the king, whatever else he could not yet face, could at least see that one wrong set right within the hour. What came after belongs to the daylight world, and I will tell it quickly, because the night was the heart of it, and the night was done. The valet Danik, being a foreign servant taken in a felony inside the palace, was held, and the Averni delegation, when they understood what one of their household had lent himself to, were quick to disown him utterly and quicker to depart, their treaty unsigned, glad to be gone before the scandal could touch their prince. Whether Danik ever named who among Morwenna's household had first bought him, I never learned. That was the king's business, and the king kept it close. But the plot died that night, and the sealed rooms of Queen Isolde were never touched, and when in their time Torin and Bram and Malin came of age the deed to wend, and the whole of their mother's careful legacy came to them entire, exactly as she had arranged, because a barefoot child had watched a wall in the dark and a sergeant had believed her. Of the Queen Consort I will say only this. She was not dragged before any court, for a king does not try his own wife in the public eye, and there was mercy in that, and calculation and grief. But within the month her household was quietly reduced, and her ladies dispersed, and her rooms in the great wing given over to other uses, and she withdrew to a distant estate of the crown where she lived out her years in a comfort that was also, Everyone understood. An exile. King Alaric never spoke against her in public, and never once, to my knowledge, spoke to her again in private. His silence, in the end, was the whole of her sentence, and those who knew him said it was a heavier one than any court could have passed. The Princess Ilara wore her mother's ring to the end of her life, and told the story of how it was nearly taken from her only to her own children, and always, they say, she told it the same way. That she had lost the last warm thing of her sister's hand, and had believed herself careless and disgraced, and that a guard she had barely spoken to had come to her and told her she was not at fault and asked her only to be brave and silent for 4 days, and had, at the end of the 4 days, put the ring back in the dish beside her bed with his own hand, as he had promised, and said nothing, and gone back to his post. For that is the last of it and the truest. When it was all over, the king gone grey to his own rooms, the burglar taken away, the prince standing at last in the wreck of the thing he had suspected for 3 years, I did the one thing that was still mine to do. I took the ring from Princess Adela's hand, with the king's leave, and I went to the small east sitting room where a young woman sat waiting, dry-eyed still, having kept her 4 days of silence to the very edge of them, and I set her mother's ring back in the porcelain dish beside her bed where it belonged, and I told her it was over and she had done nothing wrong and never had. And then I went back down to my post at the door, because it was still my watch, and a house is only ever as safe as the man who is willing to stand at its door in the quiet hour and notice. And I stood it out until my relief came at dawn, and I was, as I have been all the years since, glad of the work. They gave the credit in the end to the prince, as houses do, and that was right, for it was his nerve that carried it and his name that could not be managed. But he came to me once more in the muniment room, a week after, and he shut the good door and he said, "The house will remember that the crown prince searched a room and found a ring. I will remember that a sergeant believed a child when 4 grown fools would not, and stood a watch over a box in the dark for an hour, and took a man twice his weight on my mother's carpet, and asked for nothing after. I know which of those 2 things saved my family, Renn. I will know it as long as I live. I have thought about that many times in the long, quiet years of standing at doors. It is a strange trade, ours. We are trained to be motionless, and the world takes our stillness for emptiness and forgets us, and does its worst in front of us as though we were the furniture we resemble. But the whole art of the thing, the whole honor of it, is in the one part they never see, that a man standing still with nothing to do but watch is, if he has the discipline for it, the most dangerous thing in any house to those who count on not being seen. They counted the king and the captain and the steward and the sentry. They forgot the guard. Let that be the last word of it and the warning. However grand your scheme and however great the men you have accounted for, there is always, in a house worth the name, one still figure at a door who is not asleep, and God help you on the day he decides to notice.